which Tudor consort was the best? We have 8 to choose from. Elizabeth of York, wife of Henry VII, all 6 of Henry VIII's wives, so that's Katherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Katherine Howard and Katherine Parr, plus the only man on the list, King Philip of Spain, husband of Mary I. In today's episode of History Calling, I'm going to rank them from least successful to most and give you the reasons why I've ordered them in that way. You can then let me know in the comments what you think and what your own list would look like. To start with, I'd like to make it clear that this is just my personal ranking, based not on my opinion of whether these queens and king were good or likeable people, but rather on how well I think they fulfilled the role of consort to a Tudor monarch. It was incredibly difficult to decide on what order to put them in, and had I been writing this script on a different day, I might well have ordered them in a different way. You will all have your own opinions, of course, and your own criteria for how you would judge and rank them, and that's totally fine and will hopefully lead to some really interesting debates in the comments. Just don't be rude about it, please. This is all just a bit of fun, so no knickers in a twist. Here are the criteria I've chosen to use to rank these royals. Obviously, 7 of our 8 contenders were women, and their gender affected what was expected of them as a queen consort of England. I don't like the fact that they were generally expected to be beautiful and fertile to be a successful queen, because that is so shallow and these women were so much more than that, but an emphasis on looks and children was the way of the world in the 16th century, and so those issues will be factors in my choices. I'll also be looking at their relationships with their husbands, their charitable endeavours, their political influence, how well they managed the court, and their popularity within the Tudor royal family and beyond. I have to say it was very hard to judge Philip against some of this. As a man, a part-time husband, and a king in his own right, there were such different expectations for him that I even debated not including him in the video. In the end, though, I thought you might be interested to hear what I thought of him and why, and that it might spark a good discussion in the comments, so he is in here. What I can't do, of course, is go through all the nuances of these people's lives in this video. I'm going to have to heavily summarise their main achievements and failures, and so there will be things I don't mention that you would have liked to hear about. But again, we can discuss those things further below. Now that I've explained my criteria, let's get to the list. In the number 8 position, I've placed Katherine Howard. While I have a great deal of time and sympathy for Katherine, the fact remains that she did not have a very successful queenship. While she looked the part, made Henry VIII happy for a time, and was a lively addition to the court who loved dancing and seeing everyone have a good time, she didn't have any children, there are no great intellectual, charitable or political accomplishments to her name. There was an accusation of adultery, and her marriage was annulled, and she was executed at the age of only around 20, having been the king's wife for barely a year and a half. We simply cannot call her a successful consort, in my opinion. A lot of the things which went wrong for her weren't her fault, but that still doesn't make her time as queen a general success. At number 7, we have Anne of Cleves. Again, I like this woman, and the problems she faced weren't of her own making, but I can hardly rank the lady higher than this when she only lasted 6 months as queen, and her husband tried to get out of the marriage before it even happened. There's barely any queenship to judge her on. She provided a brief foreign alliance for Henry during the first half of 1540. She was liked by those who had dealings with her. She acquitted herself well in her court duties, and she was not ugly in my opinion, despite the slanders thrown at her, but she obviously couldn't make the king happy. She had no children, and she couldn't prevent the dissolution of her union. She was certainly more successful than Katherine Howard, though, for the simple reason that she managed to keep her head, and there was never any suggestion of improper behaviour levied at her. I must say too that she was really quite successful after her marriage at being a member of the extended Tudor family as the king's sister, but that period of her life is beyond the scope of this video. At number 6 is Philip of Spain. Philip married his older cousin Mary in July 1554, when he was already the titular King of Naples, and during the course of their marriage he became King of Spain too. On paper, he provided England with a valuable foreign ally, though in practice this ended up dragging the country into Spanish problems with France, and the town of Calais, England's last foothold in that country, was lost during Mary's reign as a result. Philip was only in England for part of his marriage, making him a part-time consort, and while she loved him, he was clearly in the union for political reasons, and had initially planned to stay only a couple of weeks after the wedding before international developments meant his father, Charles V, wanted him to remain longer. Mary wanted to bring England back into the papal fold, and her husband helped her do this, but the couple had no children, and Philip was not popular in England and was never crowned, despite angling for a coronation. He did still hold considerable sway with his wife, though. He intervened on behalf of his sister-in-law, Princess Elizabeth, to prevent Mary treating her any more harshly, and the Queen was so enamoured of him that she had him put on her coinage and made sure he was kept apprised of political decisions, despite the fact that their marriage treaty had sought to limit his powers. This ability to exercise control over a country which he was not really the king regnant of, and the fact that he didn't get dumped or executed, is why he's not at the bottom of the list. At number 5 is Anne Boleyn, which I know might shock some people given how famous she is, but fame, and indeed infamy, aren't on my list of criteria. Anne was only queen for 3 years and did not produce a living male heir, but she did give the world Elizabeth I, which turned out to be an incredibly important contribution in hindsight. She had a good relationship with Henry for many years, though most of them were before her marriage, and she was crowned queen. Most consorts on this list didn't get a coronation. But she caused enormous fractures in the wider royal family, most notably with Henry's first wife / sister-in-law, Katherine of Aragon, their daughter, Princess Mary, and Henry's sister, Mary, Queen of France, who was opposed to the Boleyn union. Even Anne's own family found her difficult at times. Her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, complained that she used language to him that one wouldn't use to a dog. She was not terribly well liked amongst the wider population either, given Catherine's popularity and the fact that Henry's determination to marry Anne was the spark that caused the English Reformation. Some would argue this was a benefit of her time as queen consort, others that it was a disaster. At the time, though, I think the mainly Catholic population of England leaned more towards disaster. She was very well educated, supported artists such as Hans Holbein, though sadly we don't have a confirmed Holbein picture of her, and performed her duties as queen very well by hosting court events, partaking in charitable activities. She was interested in alleviating poverty, for instance, and helping to get husbands for some of her ladies-in-waiting. That might not seem like much, but it was one of the Queen's duties. The biggest problem, next to her lack of a son though, and one was the cause of the other, is the fact that her relationship with Henry broke down. She was not good at keeping her temper in check, especially when he cheated on her, and while I know it is not reasonable to expect her to look the other way by modern standards, it was what was expected of a queen consort during her lifetime. Henry, of course, ended up abandoning her for one of her ladies-in-waiting, and then had Anne executed in May 1536 on trumped-up charges of incest, adultery, and treason. It's tough to argue anyone who ended up in this position, especially after such a short marriage, really had a successful queenship. The number 4 slot goes to Anne's successor, Jane Seymour. Jane's stint as queen lasted only 16 months and change, but in that time, this rather stern-looking young woman, not known for having any great intellectual abilities, though she was certainly respectably educated for the time, managed to help reconcile Henry with his daughters, produced the long-awaited male heir, and stayed on good terms with her husband for the most part, though there was one dangerous spat when she tried to save some monasteries during the Pilgrimage of Grace, and Henry made a veiled threat about her meeting the same fate as Anne Boleyn if she interfered in state affairs. This incident aside, she was generally inoffensive and well thought of, benefiting from the contrast she usually provided to the much more strident Anne Boleyn. Like Anne, she patronised Hans Holbein, and she was one of only 2 of Henry's wives who didn't see her union annulled by him, instead dying 12 days after the birth of her son in October 1537, and being buried in St George's Chapel at Windsor, where she was joined by Henry in 1547. He thought so highly of her that he continued to have her painted into images representing the royal family for years after her death. Though she was only around 28 years old when she passed away, Jane had fulfilled the main expectations of a Tudor Queen consort, and had she lived longer, she'd probably have been even higher up this list. Before we get to the top 3, just a quick reminder to please like this video and subscribe to the channel with notifications switched on, as this really helps to let YouTube know that you approve of the content and encourages the algorithm to show it to other interested parties. You can also find me on Patreon, where I release bonus content every week, including early access to ad-free videos and mini podcasts. This is linked below for you, as is my Amazon storefront and Instagram page. Thank you to those of you who also make one-off donations to the channel using the thanks button underneath videos, as your support really helps me to keep doing what I'm doing. Now let's get to the queens I've placed in the podium positions. At number 3 is Katherine Parr, final wife of Henry VIII. Now you might be thinking, how can Katherine, who had no children, be ranked higher than Jane Seymour? But the reason I've placed her here is because I would argue she was not expected to produce offspring. Having been married twice before without becoming a mother, I don't think Henry, who had fertility problems of his own by the time of their 1543 wedding, expected a little prince or princess from her. Katherine was also very successful in other areas of queenship during her 3.5-year tenure. She was a highly competent regent of England when Henry left her in charge while he went campaigning in France in the summer of 1544. She was an excellent stepmother to his 3 children and helped to create a unified family. She was very well educated and an author in her own right, with a strong interest in the Reformed religion initially championed by Anne Boleyn, and she encouraged the arts at Henry's court through her supportive painters who created images like these of her. She did come close to disaster in July 1546 when Henry almost had her arrested for her religious views, but she managed to talk her way out of the situation and get back in his good books. No mean feat for someone dealing with a double wife killer in the twilight years of his life when he was at his most volatile. On the whole, in fact, she got along well with the king, and despite having no prior court experience, acquitted herself admirably in the role and was generally popular. In the runner-up position is Catherine of Aragon. Catherine really fulfilled every expectation of a medieval queen, short of having a surviving son, and that certainly wasn't her fault. She endured at least 6 pregnancies in the 10 years after her 1509 marriage to Henry and their joint coronation, and wore herself out trying to have a living boy. She was pious, widely loved in England, considered beautiful in her youth, brought Henry a valuable Spanish alliance, was a very able regent while he was in France in 1513, her actual title, just for clarity, was Governor of the Realm and Captain General, and saw off a Scottish invasion by their brother-in-law, James IV, during that time. She was excellent at running the court, indulging Henry in his love of jousting and overseeing masques and visits from foreign royalty, most notably her sister and brother-in-law. And though Henry cheated on her, she maintained a good relationship with him on the whole for decades, and looked the other way with regards to his adultery, as expected for a woman in her position, until he threatened to leave her for Anne Boleyn and delegitimize their daughter Mary. It was only at that point that she came out fighting, and refused to accede to an annulment, though she would never agree to a Spanish invasion of England, citing the damage it would do to her adopted country. The reason she's at number 2 is because she didn't have that boy and her marriage ultimately failed, though, like I said, neither thing was her fault. At number 1, as many of you will have already worked out, is Elizabeth of York, wife of Henry VII, mother of Henry VIII, and known to history as the White Princess, thanks to the fact that she was the eldest daughter of Edward IV. Elizabeth checked all the boxes for what was expected of her. She had lots of children, including 2 boys who survived infancy. She was crowned queen. She was a political asset to her husband by virtue of her birth, which actually gave her a better blood claim on the throne than him, and their union effectively ended the Wars of the Roses. Despite her importance to the Tudor regime, though, she didn't involve herself in politics very much. She didn't assert her rights to the throne, and she didn't make a public stink about the fact that Henry occasionally treated her birth family very harshly. He had to have her cousin, Edward, Earl of Warwick, executed in 1499, for instance. She was pious, a good mother whose son Henry evidently adored her. She was well loved in England, and she and her husband seem to have had a genuinely effective, even loving marriage, despite the fact that it was an arranged match. There's no evidence of cheating on either side, and Henry VII was devastated when she died in the Tower of London in 1503 on her 37th birthday, days after giving birth to their last child, in an effort to replace their son Arthur, who had died the year before. He really couldn't have asked for more from her, and nor could England. She was buried in an ornate tomb in Westminster Abbey, where she was joined by her spouse in 1509. So that's my ranking of the Tudor consorts, and my synopsis of why I've put them in this order. As I said at the start, it was really tough to decide where to place them, and I could easily be swayed into changing my mind about some of the rankings I have included here. Before I leave you, just a little reminder that you can check out my website, historycallingofficial.com, where you can get a free download if you join my mailing list. It'll give you some very quick and easy tips on how to spot good history books before you commit to buying or reading them, and it's linked below for you. Let me know in the comments in what order you would put these consorts and why. And for more on the Tudors, try one of these videos next. I'll be back next time, and until then, keep learning.